Hello everyone and welcome to the Sweeney Show, Business and Law Podcast. My name is David Sweeney and joining me here today is Barbara Nugent. Barbara is an entrepreneur, businesswoman, Transilient Coaching, that's it, right?
That's
and
right.
EQ.E are both your companies that you have at the moment.
Yes, yeah.
Barbara, very welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, if anyone's looking, I think your Instagram is quite active and your social media. They they see lots of words of resilience, emotional intelligence, motivation. But is your training as an accountant? Is that where you started from?
That's right. Yeah. So I trained as an accountant. I qualified very many years ago, and have worked up through small practice. I've worked at the European Commission, and when I came back to Cork, I worked in American multinationals mostly for quite a number of years. So my most recent role before Transilient Coaching was Vice President of Finance with PGI, where we had taken the European headquarters from a startup in 2002. And there grew my interest in people. So I was heading up quite a very busy department in a very fast-paced environment, and became interested in how to motivate people and how to look after them, and believing that if you get the best out of people, you will always get to the goal and then some. If you look after them very well.
Richard Branson's that attitude, you look after your staff first, and by consequence, they look after your clients.
Absolutely. So I really believe in that. And as part of my own journey and my own leadership journey, I came across this idea of emotional intelligence, which is, in a few short words, using your emotions in a smart way. So rather than being the victim of your emotions, understanding them. And I suppose people think, I don't really want to talk about emotions in the workplace, but the whole thing is we bring our whole selves to work and we are emotional. So, when you wake up in the morning, what you have for breakfast depends on how you feel.
And does that mean then, your emotions reacting emotionally to things, or does that mean if you had a bad morning at home with your family, not to bring that emotion into work, or is it all the same thing?
It's a little bit of both. So what I like to use is the analogy more of responding to something rather than reacting. And I think it's Declan Coyle, he wrote that book, The Green Platform. He talks about the white space between reacting and responding. So that moment that you have where you can choose to do something else. So if you want to go into the neuroscience, we create these neural pathways of things that we do repeatedly. So, brushing your teeth, for example, if you brush your teeth with your right hand, you have a neural pathway that just does that, and half the time you don't even remember if you did it or not. So we have the same thing with our emotions. We have triggers and we react to certain things in the same way all the time. So it might be people.
Is that a protection thing for yourself, or does it depend on the attack, if you want to say it?
So I suppose if you want to get into the kind of fight or flight type of thing, so if you perceive something to be a threat to you, no matter, it might be an email, it might be a phone call, it might be somebody honking the horn on the road, or somebody cutting you up or whatever, that could be a trigger. And so you will react in a particular way. And your automatic reaction is that instinctual fight or flight one. It just comes right like that, and there's no thought. So the idea is to interrupt those patterns, to allow your logical brain to kick in, which is the more modern part of your brain, if you like. And when you have that moment to kick in, then you can choose. So it's like when you were a kid and your mum used to say to you, count to 10 now before you answer me. It was that the neuroscience is that allowed your logical brain to kick in, and then you have a decision that could be made with both emotion and logic together, because that's when you get the best outcome.
And is there a right or wrong response?
Well, I suppose it's that, it depends on the situation. I think the first thing is around awareness. It's around knowing yourself and how you respond to certain things or certain triggers. And it's not always about losing your temper. It can be, somebody asks you to do a project and the first thing you say is, oh no, not me, I wouldn't be good enough. So that's a self-confidence issue. Or it could be around flexibility, that kind of, we've always done it like this, I don't want to talk about change. So that's an emotional intelligence competency as well. Optimism is another one, so the glass half full, glass empty. So these are the things that you automatically respond before you actually think, is that the best response I can make in this situation, depending on the situation.
As a leader then in business, is emotional intelligence then kind of used to not figure out, but read maybe your staff or your
Yeah.
team, or like maybe just a specific
Yes.
employee,
Yes.
that maybe there's something going on in that person's life
Yeah.
that your emotional intelligence allows you to trigger that understanding and how to deal with that. Is that
Yes,
something that's
absolutely.
important too?
Yeah, so empathy would be another emotional intelligence competency. So there are 10 of them. And so it's that ability to look at it from somebody else's point of view, but to be able to make that decision. So it's quite deliberate. So I'm going to not say what I was just about to say, and I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to think, well, you know what, how must it be like from Dave's point of view? And that allows me to make a different response to you, which hopefully would be much more helpful than...
Is that what we call, as growing up, is that maturity? So do you know, you mature, your brain develops or as you get older, but like we're talking about, so you have, because you're dealing with fully formed adults.
Yes.
So they are mature enough, but they just can't control the emotional reaction they might have had in the situation.
Yeah, or not even recognise it. So most people, I think it's like 65% of people can't name the emotion in the moment that they have.
So say for example, in a sporting situation, say someone like Roy Keane, and we say the red mist would descend.
Yes.
So he would react. Is that so?
Yes.
And I know like a lot of high-end sports people, they work at a different, I suppose, standard, but that when something, and they have their priorities are so driven in that moment, but that when they respond to a referee or like, you know, is that's an emotional reaction innate in them, is it?
Yes, and it's that fight or flight sort of reaction. You know, I'm going to stand up and fight, or I'm going to say something, or whatever it is.
Now, obviously, that doesn't work well in the boardroom, but like in the soccer pitch, Alex Ferguson would have wanted that reaction. That there's a balance there.
And would have encouraged it, I guess.
Yeah. So in the workplace, then, if you have someone that's consistently using their emotions, like can they be trained? Like you said, there's like 10 elements of that part of it.
Yeah.
Is there exercises they can do or coaching they can have to kind of improve themselves?
Yeah, so that's what I do. And I think one of the very first things that I work with people is self-awareness. Are you actually aware that this is how you react when this happens? And often
that's a really powerful tool, isn't it? If you're self-aware.
Yes.
Like just in general about your position in society, your job, your family, or how you're perceived
or
yourself.
the atmosphere in the room, or, you know, so if you're in the boardroom and there's a lot of tension, are you adding to it, or are you helping it? You know, so how do I, through my emotions, help or hinder the situation? And that awareness is key. And a lot of people just aren't, you know, so it's keeping a diary, it's, you know, writing down things that happened, and then coming for coaching, and, you know, the question will be, well, what else could you have done there? You know, were there 5 options here? Why did you choose that particular one? And so on. So it's really, you know, questioning yourself as to why you react to things in a particular way.
And do you then, say in a decision, not a reaction, in a decision-making process, so people would use their emotional side to make a decision, and their, you know, their, what would you say the other side is then? The logical side. Is your gut part of that? You know, is your gut an emotional intelligence, or how do people make decisions?
Yeah, well,
should you trust your gut?
Well, that's a whole other thing, I suppose. As part of leadership, I studied decision making, and one of the things is you should never use your gut. It should always be logical, and that was one of the things.
Based on evidence and
based on evidence and based on analytics and all the rest of it. Now, I'm not sure I actually agree with that entirely, because I think our physiology also helps us to make decisions, and you know, people will say, I felt this wasn't right or wrong, you know. So I think I think your emotions have a place. They most definitely have a place, but it's using them more deliberately rather than just being on the receiving end of them, if you like.
And you talk a lot about resilience then. So what is resilience in essence?
So resilience is another emotional intelligence competency, and we talk about resilience as, if I ask people, what does resilience mean to you, invariably people will say things like, oh, it's being able to bounce back. So I would contend that it's not really about being able to bounce back, because you can't always go back to where you are. So resilience comes from the word resile, which means if you stretch and stretch something and let it go, it goes back to its original shape. But as individuals, as people, every single experience we have, no matter how big or how small, it changes us in some way. So we never actually go back to the way we were. So I prefer the analogy bouncing forward. So it's, you know, being in a difficult situation, learning something about it and about yourself, and being able to bounce forward much stronger with a lot more information and knowledge to be able to deal with things again.
And is that like, is that dealing with setbacks, or
Yeah.
so how like
dealing with setbacks and finding yourself. So I suppose what I see a lot of in corporates where I do a lot of coaching is that people are very, very stressed. They have limited resources. The demands from the organisation are getting higher and higher, and yet there's no more resources, and they're stretched. And some people handle that very well, and some people don't. And it's that ability to manage those situations and manage what's going on in that situation that will help you to be more resilient. But then you have also sort of huge life events like the death of somebody, the loss of somebody, an illness, a sickness, or something as less life-threatening or important as failing an exam or not passing your driving test or whatever. Yeah. So a lot of students now at the moment heading into exam time, for example, if they don't get the results that they wanted, how are they going to come back from that? Some will manage very well, but some don't. And it's, I suppose, those people who don't would be the ones that could be depressed or could have a lot of anxiety or angst or whatever, and it's helping them to help themselves.
And what do you tell people, like say a particular student might have got the leaving cert they wanted or might be disappointed? Do you tell them that the evidence has suggested you're well capable of study, you should go back and do study again, or do you tell them that maybe reassess your decision making as regards what career you want to go down?
Yeah, and I suppose these are all parts of how people pick themselves up. So the way I would talk to a student is, first of all, to understand what they had done or why they had applied for that particular course, and then look at what other options are there? Is there another way to get this course? Does it exist somewhere else? So I would encourage people to look at the relationships that they have, ask people that who are doing what you want to do, for example, how did they get to do it?
Maybe,
So it's opening up the doors rather than, oh my God, I didn't get this thing and now my life is worthless.
Sure.
So it's looking at things from another perspective. It's managing your self-talk. What are you saying to yourself about yourself? I failed my exam, I'm a useless person. Or how do we step out of that and say, well, okay, what have I learned, and how do we go forward?
It sounds like you take a holistic approach. Is wellness, is that this the well-being of people?
Yes.
Is that something you've taken on board as well in how you assess people for emotional intelligence and their resilience?
Yeah, I suppose the thing is that and you mentioned it earlier, if you have a bad day at work, are you supposed to leave that person at home? Well, we don't. We bring that person with us everywhere. So we bring our whole selves to work. And I suppose the idea of resilience is coming up more and more, because what we're finding is that, and a very interesting article in the Irish Times there recently, that we're not teaching our children to be resilient, that we are protecting them from everything. And so when these young people get into the workplace, they find that they just can't cope.
Is this the snowflake generation?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. And
can you just say that the older generation always says that about the younger generation? Yes. It's just history repeating itself. Yes. But do you think that there is something maybe because of the social media, phones, all that kind of stuff, or is it just that or is it to do with our economy or our recession boom cycle that these kids now have probably, they were pre the recession when they were growing up and now hit adulthood, or do those factors have a bearing?
Certainly I think social media has a certain bearing, because there is a whole idea there around expectations. What do I expect somebody like me should look like?
Nobody puts a bad photo on Instagram.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or what do I expect somebody my age should be doing, or where I should be? And so there is that whole element of evaluating or rating yourself, where am I in comparison to my hero on Instagram or wherever it is. And so we choose to say, well, I'm only a 5 or I'm only a 2 in comparison to this person. So there's definitely an element of that. But I think the other thing is teaching our children to have those confidence skills, to be actually self-confident around who they are and what they are, and also around managing peer pressure. Because I think, they are surrounded by dozens of youngsters with all of these ideas as well. And how do they say, well, I'm going to be different and I'm not going to think like that? So I think the pressures, and funny, I was just having a conversation with somebody around this. We were just saying that this change in young people in their ability to cope with difficult situations is probably only arisen in the last 30 years. Because some of the wording even that young people have now, even things like Anxiety, for example, as a child, I wouldn't really even have known what that was. And now suddenly, or bullying is another, we've put words on things that is a good thing. But also I think youngsters can latch onto them and label themselves, and that's not a good thing. So I think we need to do a lot more work in teaching our youngsters how to be more resilient around some of these difficult things they face.
And I think you brought in a product with us today. Can you just explain what this is?
Yes, I want to share this with you. This is a very innovative. So there's a little story behind this if you have time for it. So this puzzle was created by a very good friend of mine, Shelley Crawford, and Shelley and myself and another colleague, David Bailey, are working together to bring this product to coaches and therapists, counsellors, people who are in the helping environment, if you like. And it's based on Shelley's own story. Shelley is a mom of 5, I think, and her daughter, Jessica, attempted to take her own life when she was just 19. And Shelley is a wellness coach, so she, using all of her knowledge and her background, she thought, well, how can we build something to come out of this? How do we get here? How do we come back? So how do we bounce back, in fact? And she developed this model, which we have named Jess, after Jessica, her daughter, who is now about 26 and is going to become a mum, which is wonderful. And this is a human systems model. So it's based, as you said, on that holistic approach to resilience. So this is the cognitive, so what goes on in my head. This is the emotional, so a little bit of the emotional intelligence that we spoke about. This is the social, so on my relationships, and this is the physical. So if you think, mindfulness is something that people are very interested in, and it's a very effective tool to develop self-awareness, which we were talking about there earlier. It's only one thing. So there are loads of other opportunities to build resilience. And these 3 hearts here in the middle are our sense of connectedness. So as humans, we want to feel connected. So it might be to our company or to our family or to our community or our country or whatever it is, but we have a need to have a tribe. And so this is how I manage my sense of connectedness. So talking about following our intuition, experiencing love, and using the breath, and that's where mindfulness would be very useful. But if you look at some of the pieces here, every single piece has research behind it. There's coaching psychology behind it, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's positive psychology. So all of these types of...
Is this a tool for someone like yourself when they're assessing someone to kind of figure out, yes, they have that piece of the puzzle, they need to work on this one? Or is this something that someone that might be experiencing things would look at this and say, this is how I can help myself?
Yeah, so it's really around helping people to help themselves. So what I typically would do is put all of the pieces into a bag, and I would ask you to pick one out.
Okay.
And then I would say, well, what does that piece mean to you? And we would talk about it. And we would see, do you have, for example, if you look at fear. So this is managing fear, future events appeering real. So
is that anxiety?
Yeah, or what do you fear most around a situation? And the idea around fear is, of course, fear is something that hasn't actually happened. So we fear something that may happen or that might happen or that could happen, but it hasn't actually happened. So how do you manage your thoughts around fear? So it might be, well, what's the worst that could happen? And if that happened, how would you react to that?
And let's say, are we would the person, like, I suppose this is valid for any age person, but if this is a teenager, do they take their ways of dealing with fear in this case from their parents, from their environment, or is it something innate in that person? It can actually, or is it a mixture?
I think it's a mixture. I think we learn obviously from our parents and our environment, and peers in those years are really important. So you'll often hear parents saying, their friends are so important, who they hang out with, and so as young people, we are influenced by all of those, and maybe we have particular heroes. There might be sporting heroes, there might be social media heroes, and we take on all of that. So we're absorbing all of this from around us. And depending on the situation, we will sort of, again, I use that word, rate ourselves in comparison to something else.
Yeah.
And it's that idea of comparison, you know, it really is the thief of joy, because, you know, you might be very happy with yourself and then you look at somebody else and then you feel, well, I'm not enough.
And is this considered an alternative approach to things? Like, what's your view on medication and, you know, and that kind of prescribed medication for depression and anxiety? Is this something that you can do with that, or should someone maybe look at this instead of having a prescription from a GP or something?
The way that we look at this is that it is an early intervention tool. So there's absolutely room for you know, psychology and counselling and medication if that's what people need. But we're looking at this as an educational tool, but an early intervention tool. So it might be a situation where somebody is feeling a bit anxious or is having a particular difficulty, and so we would look at some of the things and the interaction between all of these pieces for that person. So it might be around their thoughts. It could equally be, you know, exercise is a fantastic way to affect the way you think and the way you feel. So it affects both of these areas here. Maybe looking at relationships. So what kind of people do you have in your life? Are they positive? Are they negative? And what are you going to do about that? So it's an early stage intervention tool, but it's also an educational tool. So I think it's something that you could use with people even when they're in a good space, and ask them, how are they building up these pieces in their lives? So what we've done with this actually is we really saw the need to bring it to organisations and potentially to, you know, colleges where you have, you know, students going out into the world. So we've developed it into a board game. And so the board game is based on this, but there are several pieces to each one of these pieces. And so it's your traditional board game. You throw a dice, you move, you land on a space, and you pick up a card. And on the card is a little piece of information, for example, around the piece, maybe a bit in neuroscience, maybe a little bit of CBT or something. And on the back is an activity. And the people playing the game will do the activity together, or they might chat about
And is that game intended for people who are going to see yourself, or is it intended for the home, or where is the actual environment?
Well, again, it could be, most definitely it could be at home.
Yeah.
So part of it is around how we configure the cards. So the cards can be changed depending on who the audience is. So for example, if you did it with a team, you could put a lot of language around working in teams and what will you do differently as a team. Or if you're in a school, you might put in more language around exams or things that are pertinent to students. Or if it was older people, it could be around job searching or career paths or whatever.
Is it launched now, or is it in the making, or
it is launched and we are using it. So we're talking to a lot of healthcare companies. One of the ideas that I sort of have in the back of my head is looking to organisations to sponsor it going into schools, because funding in schools obviously is very limited, but it would be great if part of their CSR, for example, companies might be interested in sponsoring a programme in a school, for example. And then we've done quite a bit with corporate teams. One of the companies that are using us are looking at it from the perspective of diversity and inclusion, because the conversations you would be having around food or sleep or making positive choices or using your strengths help you to get to know people better, but also create common human ground where people can kind of understand each other a little bit better and be a little bit more empathic or be a little bit more flexible, and so on. So that's another avenue.
Yeah, well, listen, congratulations. If people want to contact you or get in touch about the product Jess itself, what's the best way to get you?
The best way is probably through my website or my email.
So we put those details up on the screen here.
That's great.
And listen, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to have you, and we wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you.
Cheers.